Good morning. I'm Ann Jacobs. I'm the director of the Prisoner Reentry Institute at John Jay College, and we sponsor the occasional series on research and reentry. I am really pleased to welcome you today to John Jay. And again, thank you for being on time. These events just continue to perplex me. We were thinking about having to cut off registration because we were way oversubscribed. And you can see we're starting while people are clearly still in transit. I'm going to introduce the moderator to you, who will introduce the panel in just a minute. But I've been instructed to tell you that if you're live tweeting, use hashtag OCEMI. One of these mysteries of life that I've passed on now, but I couldn't do myself. And if you forget, it's on the back. So I'm really pleased to have this panel today, and as I told them, I will be disappointed if it isn't a very thought-provoking kind of conversation. We've certainly taken on a big topic, which is why we put it in big letters, right? Ending mass incarceration. We are in the very capable hands of Chris Watler as the moderator today. Chris is a longtime colleague of mine and a very esteemed person in doing this work. He's the project director of the Harlem Community Justice Center, which is the community court in Harlem focusing on housing, youth crime, and offender and reentry. They are also the site of the Harlem Justice Corps, which is one of the projects of the Prisoner Reentry Institute. Chris has been with the Center for Court Innovation for a number of years, previously serving as Deputy Director of National Technical Assistance, and he was very involved in the design of the Red Hook Community Justice Center and the Crown Heights Community Mediation Center. The longer bio for him is on the handout today. So I want to thank Chris for doing this and turn this over to him.
Great. Thanks so much, Ann, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope you are as excited as I am about this panel. I was asked a couple weeks ago to moderate and jumped at the chance to do this. I've been an admirer of everyone on this panel for a while. Just in terms of kind of framing this issue, we're here today to really talk about how to end mass incarceration. And I want to say that for those of us in the criminal justice business, some of this conversation may be a little uncomfortable because we are going to have to talk about some of the things that we have gotten used to, both in our society, but even in the professional criminal justice system, the way that we deal with people, particularly people of color. And I want to say that right up front, because too often we talk about race very quickly and then we move on to talk about all sorts of other stuff. And I wanted to start right up front by talking about how mass incarceration, has impacted communities of color, particularly black men and increasingly black women. And that as a child of this city, having grown up in Crown Heights, working in Harlem and living in Bed-Stuy, I have watched even in my own personal life how this system has affected my community and the communities that I serve. So I wanted to say that up front, that we have to begin to think about why we have incarcerated so many men and women, particularly men and women of color. And I don't want to leave out poor whites and Latinos and others, and why this system has failed so tremendously. And we, the nation of Yankee ingenuity, have allowed this system to grow. And what makes it a kind of mass incarceration system is also that it is self-perpetuating, right? The problems that it's supposed to solve, crime and improving public safety, it frankly doesn't. Yet it continues to grow, and the problems that result from that growth are hopefully what we will talk about today. The way that it will work today, each panelist has been given 15 minutes. Is that better?
It'll go back down soon.
You can blame my mother and father. Each panelist will have 15 minutes to make a presentation, and then I will have a couple of questions to get started. And then I'm really hoping that as a community here in this room that we will have a conversation after that. I'm honored, and we are honored to have a really distinguished panel. I won't go through their bios, but Todd Clear, as most of you know, is the Dean of the School of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University, and he's been a real guiding light in talking about the issue of mass incarceration. Judith Greene, to my immediate right, is one of the nation's leading criminal justice experts. I have actually spent a fair amount of time reading her work recently and rereading some things that I had read a while ago. And I highly, recommend that you check out her writings. Michael Connelly is a partner at JCO Consulting, which serves correctional and sentencing, provides correctional and sentencing resources to state and local governments. He also talks regularly to the president, I understand. Yes. And Tanya Coke is a senior consultant to the Atlantic Philanthropies program on children and youth. She has had an extensive career advocating for social change. So as I like to say, I love the way Oprah starts work, or she begins work every day and ends it to wild applause. So I'd ask you to please welcome our panel appropriately. With that said, I will invite Dean Clear to come up and make his presentation.
What goes up must come down. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for that introduction. And I have to start by saying how delighted I am to be back in John Jay. I was here for 11 years as a faculty member. It was a wonderful experience, and I had complete deja vu. I rode my bike here like I used to. Then I walked out on the patio between the two buildings, and I was green with envy, just like the grass. It is just wonderful what has happened to this place at the moment I started to leave. So I'm going to talk about today's opportunity, justice reinvestment, and the end of mass incarceration. I'm going to whip through a few slides and I hope set up a conversation about the work that is before us if we're going to do something about mass incarceration. So we've been engaged in a great prison experiment for the last 40 years or so. We've had a growth in the rate and size of imprisonment for nearly 40 years. In 1972, there were about 200,000 prisoners, and the incarceration rate was about 100 per 100,000. By 2012, we have an 8-fold increase in the number of people who are in prison, and a 5-fold increase in the rate of putting them there. This has been accomplished, I'll come back to this point, this has been accomplished by the levers of what Jim Austin and I have called the iron law of prison populations. That is, prison populations are produced by the number of people who enter prison, new crimes, and how long they stay in prison, and how many people who we've put through prison we put back through prison again another time. Everything else is noise. And on the issue of mass incarceration, if you're talking about something and it is not one of those three things, you are not talking about mass incarceration. You may be talking about something very important, and I'll come back to this, but you're not talking about mass incarceration. This is the graph that is familiar to many of us. It is the crime rate and the incarceration rate. The blue line is the crime rate. The red line is the incarceration rate. The earlier date is 1931. The end date is 2010. And what you see here, I often spend some 10 or 15 minutes just talking about this graph, and I've got a person with a sign down here who will stop me if I get too late. So I'm just going to make a couple of points. The first point is you'll notice that the growth in the blue line, the crime rate, occurs before the growth in the red line, the incarceration rate. So the crime rate in the United States actually did almost all of its growing work before the first year of the growth of incarceration. So people who think that there's this close relationship between crime rates and incarceration rates are simply wrong. And what you'll also see is that as the crime rates began to drop, the growth in the incarceration rate began to level out. I think I'll just leave it at that. One more point, you see a little gray line here. This gray line here. That is the date in which the incarceration rate began to grow. It also corresponds to the date in which I started arguing that we ought to reduce the use of imprisonment in the United States. So this graph is the testimony to the entire failure of my entire career. Well, what you see is that today the crime rate is about where we started when we started the great prison expansion. So if I'd said to you 40 years ago, we're going to quintuple the rate of incarceration and by 8 times increase the number of people locked up, what do you think is going to happen to the crime rate? If you said, well, it'll be about the same, it'll go up and down a while and then it'll come back to about where it was, you'd have been thought to be crazy, but you wouldn't have been crazy, you've been actually correct. There have been 3 main periods of prison expansion. In the 70s, the growth of incarceration was mostly due to the increases in crime rates. That is, the rate of apprehending people given a crime stayed stable, the rate of sending them to prison stayed roughly stable, the length of stay stayed roughly stable. Growth in incarceration was slow, but it was slow and it was essentially equal to the rate of growing crime. In 1980s and 1990s, we had a very rapid growth in the size of the prison population, mostly due to the number of people going to prison because we stopped the use of probation as a sanction. We reduced the use of probation as a sanction, and we increased the rate of going to prison given conviction for a felony. In the mid-1990s to about 2009, the growth was largely related to increases in length of stay. So remember my iron law. So for about a 15-year period, we built new prisons on the basis of not putting people on probation. For about 15 years or so, we built new prisons on the basis of making people stay there longer. At the crime rate, and as I said, the crime rate in 2010 is about where it was in '72. This is prison intake since 1999, and what you see is that prison population is, the red line is leveling off by 2010 and starting to decline. Much of that decline is California, by the way. And admissions, prison admissions starts to decline about 3 or 4 years earlier. This is what has happened to length of stay. I'm going to whip through this quickly. In 1990, the length of stay for violent crimes is about 44 months, property crime 21 months, drug crime 19 months. By 2009, we increased length of stay for violent crimes, property crimes, and drug crimes, and so what you see is that we built prison populations basically by making people who go to prison stay there longer. This is what changes in sentence length of stay and parole supervision lengths since 1993 to 2009. So what you see is that in terms of sentencing themselves, the sentence itself, sentences have dropped, ironically, since 1993. But time served has increased. We've gotten rid of discretionary parole. We've actually kept people on supervision because we keep violating them. And so we've been able to grow the system, even at the same time we're able to say that we are not sentencing people more radically. Parole time has increased, so that what we have here is a policy that has built prison populations by making people vulnerable to the criminal justice system for a longer period of time, about 15 months total. This has obviously resulted in a change in the mix of people who are in prison. In 1980, less than 10% of the people were in for drug or public order crimes. By 1993, that had grown to almost 30%. And today, by 2005, what you see is by lengthening length of stay and by changing drug laws, by reducing the use of probation for people convicted of drug offenses, what we have done is to increase the mix of people, change the mix of people in prison, increasing to particularly drug and public order related crime. So that leads me to where today we are. So for most of my career, the debate has been on the relationship between the size of the prison population and the amount of crime. And that has been where the focus of the conversation has been. But that's no longer true, because in the 80s and 90s, there were lots of studies that showed these huge impacts of incarceration on crime rates, including one that said that for every year a person is locked up, you prevent almost 600 crimes in the community, which is ironic because if you increase the incarceration rate by the number of people locked up by 5 times and get the same crime rate, then a nation as a whole must be much more criminal, right? But as studies began to control for other factors and look at this in a more sophisticated way and begin to understand the dynamics, the hydraulic dynamics of the justice system, we began to see that there were much much smaller impacts of incarceration on crime rates in the order of a 10% increase in the size of the prison population, resulting in a 0.1% reduction in the size of the crime rate. So it's not the case that there's no relationship between crime and incarceration, but it is a case that the relationship is quite small. And we are also beginning to get information about the big incarceration experiment. So in the 80s and 90s, papers that were published in journals and books that were written speculated about how much our growing prison population was making the nation safer. You never see papers like that anymore published. You simply don't see them. Most of the papers now consider questions about the big incarceration experiment. They ask the questions about collateral consequences of incarceration. Never a week goes by that I don't get another paper that explores this or that different dimension of the growth of incarceration on some aspect of human capital or public policy. And almost never is the story a good one. You know, hey, we've increased the number of people in jails and prisons, and look at this, schools are better. You know, those are not the stories that people publish. We now know that there's a tremendously negative effects of mass incarceration on people who go to prison. I'll just give you one. Lifetime earnings are 40% less if you go to prison. If you live in a community where almost every male has gone to prison, you live in a community where the lifetime capital that can be used to support children and families, businesses, and so on in that community is 40% less. And there's impact on people who don't go to prison, as I just described. So today, the real debate that's going on is how to reduce mass incarceration. What I want to do is to say that in order to address that debate, you have to remember the iron law of prison populations, which is that prison populations are produced by how many people go to prison and how long they stay. Everything else is noise. We are easily distracted from this, by the way, because we want to talk about emotional topics like innocence. And there's no question that there are people in prison who are innocent, but if every innocent person in prison was released today, we still have mass incarceration. By the way, if every guilty person in this room had to go to prison, we could close down the workshop. The death penalty, I'm opposed to the death penalty. It's a barbaric thing, but if you eliminated it tomorrow, we'd still have mass incarceration. We also get caught up in programmatic topics because we want to, make reentry better, and I'm in favor of making reentry better. But let me just say that to be in a reentry program, you have to have been in the entry program, and the entry program is prison, and that's how we get mass incarceration is through entry, not reentry. Alternatives to incarceration. I have made a career on probation issues, and I believe intensely in alternatives to incarceration. But if you think that you build an attractive alternative to incarceration, you're going to reduce the number of people who go to prison, you are believing against 30 years of research on the effects of alternatives to incarceration that show that they don't do anything about prison populations. And rehabilitation programs. We are morally obligated to offer to people who we have incarcerated the opportunity to correct their lives and build good lives of human substance. But of all the research we know, if you are optimistic and provided proven rehabilitation programs to the entire population of the people in prison, you can show mathematically that over time, it's not going to have much impact on the size of the prison population because it simply doesn't have that size of an impact. So you have to stop talking about these things if you want to talk about mass incarceration. You have to start talking about things that really make sense. Here are 4 ideas. One is reduce the length of stay of people in prison to 1988 levels. Not back to 72 when we started, but back to 88. A second idea is to no longer send people to prison for failing to abide by the rules of supervision. If they don't abide by the rules, do something else, but don't send them to prison. A third proposal is to no longer send people to prison for drug-related crimes. This is an idea that the Wall Street Journal recently began to, can you imagine, the Wall Street Journal? And fourth, reduce length of stay for people placed on probation and parole. If you simply cut in half the vulnerability of people who are under supervision to the state, you will reduce prison populations just by making them less likely to go back to prison. And this kind of stuff is being talked about today. 1/3 of the states in the United States have either closed a prison or are proposing to close a prison. 2/3 of the states in the United States have enacted some sort of criminal justice reform that has its intention of reducing prison populations. I'm going to let Judy talk a little bit more about what that means. So the idea of justice reinvestment, which is the topic that we are thinking about today, is that it has been conceived of as a way to energize reductions in mass incarceration because it has 2 elements. One is that it starts with programs to systematically reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. And the second element is that it takes the money saved by reducing prison populations and reinvests that money in communities that have high incarceration rates. The federal government has developed a whole series of initiatives to try to do justice reinvestment. I'm going to let the other panelists talk about some of that work. It has not been successful. And nonprofit partners, there have been a number of nonprofit partners with state and local policymakers, and they've been trying to do this work. So let me just say in conclusion that the moment we are in is that the unprecedented policy experiment with the use of mass incarcerations is grinding to a halt. Evidence has accumulated that the impact on crime is limited, that the collateral consequences are not sustainable, and we don't like them both as a culture and as a policy, and that the fiscal implications are irritating beyond imagination. So today's policy environment is completely changed from what it has been for the last 30 years. We are entering a time of prison population reduction. The question is, can we really pull it off? Thanks.
Right, so can we do it? Yes, we can. And I'm going to give you some examples. But first I got to say that since his gray box revealed that he began advocating alternatives to incarceration and reducing incarceration 2 years before I began, I need to go home and figure out why I look like his mother. Anyway, I'm going to repeat iron law. If you want to reduce prison populations, you've got to reduce the number of people going in, you've got to reduce the amount of time they stay there. The other sort of overarching principle that will lead me to telling you about what is working in states that are reducing mass incarceration is, axiomatic. There aren't any silver bullets. Boot camps and Scared Straight didn't reduce prison populations, they helped to grow it. Restorative justice is a great idea, but it's never been taken up seriously. And so, unfortunately, the boring truth is that if you want to reduce mass incarceration, you have to go back through the history that Todd presented so graphically and look at each and every point in the criminal justice system where a discretionary choice or a new law or policy will make a difference or did make a difference. If you go back to the beginnings of mass incarceration in the late 70s, just document everything that happened. More arrests, criminalization of people who were previously not thought to be prison material, principally, the drug war. Charging practices in prosecutors' offices that got tough. This was the era of get tough as we scooted into the early 80s. Sentencing decisions made by judges who then were saddled when they made their sentencing decisions with mandatory minimum laws, truth in sentencing laws, 3 strikes you're out, whatever. These laws greatly increased the length of stay. At the same time, parole rates plummeted, and we developed this idea of zero tolerance for technical parole violations. So I'm going to focus a bit on 3 states that are making amazing progress. They're not the only ones. There's now half a dozen or more states that seem to be actually doing things to reduce population. Making the point first, as you can see on the graphs, that because crime is going down, prison population should be going down everywhere. But the system has a way of compensating for, Mother Nature, let's say, because laws that have been put in place that lengthen time in prison, prosecutorial and police practices and policies are still, gee, if we don't have as many of these crimes to go out and arrest people for, let's arrest people more for these crimes, particularly the ones that we can control by putting more cops on the street and stop and frisk and buy and bust, and you know the drill. But New York, New Jersey, and Colorado are three states where, nature's law that if there are fewer crimes going on, there will be fewer arrests, are actually taking hold. And in addition, policymakers and criminal justice practitioners in those states are doing affirmative things that can be identified as being under the iron law. So let's just review quickly the patterns of prison population in those three states. New York began a prison population decline in 1999. By May of this year, the population had fallen by 25%. Our sister state across the Hudson, again, population decline began after 1999. It's now declined by 24%. And Colorado is a latecomer. It didn't get really started on trying to do things about managing their correctional populations in a smarter way until 2009, a decade later. But as of, again, May this year, the state population has declined by 13%. And if I project Colorado out for the 10-year period that brought the prison populations down by 20% each in New York and New Jersey, Colorado will, by 2018, have reduced their population by 31%. They will have outstripped New York and New Jersey, and hopefully we will have forged far ahead. So what was done in those states, by policymakers in order to, say, speed the plow of prison reduction? In New York, it was primarily vigorous and sustained advocacy to reduce or harm reduction, to intervene in the drug war, wind it down. And specifically in New York, in 1999, unbeknownst to almost everybody, including me at the time, although I've nailed it down since in conversations with judges and prosecutors about what happened in 1999, the police department decided to largely dismantle the buy and bust drug enforcement model. They started reducing the number of officers out there doing buy and bust. They basically took narcotics enforcement back to what it had been, the felony narcotics enforcement, before the drug war went wild in New York in the mid-'80s. Also, changes in prosecution policies going all the way back to Joe Hines' DTAP program that opened up the minds of prosecutors and judges that maybe sending people selling drugs who were using drugs to prison was not such a good idea because treatment would be more effective in terms of community safety. The Pataki administration introduced a number of instruments, and principally sort of merit release, earned release, do good things while you are in prison, get an education, do drug treatment, etc., and we will let you out early. And then finally, after 10 years, and I want to emphasize that the reduction in, a remarkable reduction in felony drug arrests, prosecutions, and sentencing to prison happened before we dropped the rock. And we dropped the rock in 2009 and went from 20% reduction now to a 25% reduction. In New Jersey, it all started with litigation that woke up the parole board. Nobody was getting paroled in New Jersey. Nobody was even getting their parole interviews. So litigation in 2000 forced the state to bring somebody else in to run parole, and parole started happening, and changes in what happened when people violated their parole in ways that were not criminal changed. And there was also a change in prosecutorial policies related to the school zone law in New Jersey that gave judges discretion back for most cases involving people who were arrested within the 1,000 feet school zones, which blanketed Newark, Camden, Trenton. And then finally, major reform in the school zone law. They shrunk the zones so that the blanket has big holes in it, so that it acts as more of a deterrence because you can actually leave a school zone and not be in the next one. In Colorado, they set up a sentencing commission in 2008, I think. It geared up. It started by working at the back end. It started and then did some work on juveniles. But now, since then, they have introduced sentencing reforms so that drug possession, which has always been a felony matter in Colorado, can become a misdemeanor, assuming that somebody is amenable to treatment. And they have done a variety of other kinds of things. Christy Donner, who heads the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition and has been very active on the commission, the state commission on juvenile and criminal justice, says our method is the 100 tweaks. They've done lots to shorten prison time. They've done lots to wake up the parole board. They've done sentencing reform at the front end, et cetera. Wondering, got 5 minutes. What I want to do here is run down a list of some of the policy changes that could really be helpful. I'll go through it really quickly. With policing, sharply reducing arrests for drug felonies. This has happened in New York and has also happened in Washington State, in Seattle. Implementing direct police diversion of arrestees. Seattle has a new program called LEAD, and notwithstanding that for the most part programs don't work, in this case the program is police not locking people up if they're arrested for drugs in certain areas of Seattle, but rather referring them directly to social services. And I think that can be a game changer. It's helping change the mindset about what do we do with folks that are selling drugs down in Pioneer Square. And a large part of the impetus for that program was indeed research that showed that there are open-air drug markets all across Seattle. They are multicultural, multiracial, ethnic drug markets, but only African-American men selling crack were getting arrested. So we have promoting alternatives to deal with mentally ill people without arresting them, challenging the asset forfeiture and federal grant policies, which incentivize more and more arrests. With prosecution, the kinds of ideas mentioned before in terms of changing, charging policies and plea policies related to drug offenses, but also supporting, again, this is the only other program I would put on this list, supporting alternatives to prosecution for people accused of violent crimes. And here in Brooklyn, people may know that Joe Hines has pioneered a program collaboratively with the Vera Institute of Justice called Common Justice, which is diverting young people charged with serious violent felonies. Sentencing policy reforms, I mean, we all know about what's necessary there. Repealing mandatory minimum sentencing, rolling back tooth in sentencing. A couple of years ago, Mississippi reintroduced parole for people in prison for drug sales. Reclassifying offenses to reduce their disparity, introducing merit release. In Missouri, I think there's a notable and promising development. The Missouri Sentencing Guidelines Commission, or I forget what they call themselves, but has introduced a sentencing information system. They have an app for that. And the app is available to judges, prosecutors, defenders, and you if you want to go to the website. And what happens is that if you have a particular case, you type in some 11 factors that deal with mostly the personal characteristics, because it is a risk predictor, of the offender and the offense itself. And then what you get is a number of sentencing scenarios. Now, what's really makes this different than your typical, guideline situation, for one, it's advisory, it's not mandatory, but also the information which each sentencing scenario comes with information about what the recidivism rate is reliably predicted to be if the judge or the prosecutor chooses sentence A versus sentence B versus sentence C, and the costs incurred, so that the people who are making the sentencing decisions, and it's being used in the neighborhood of 700 or 800 cases a year, and the use is widening. People making those decisions can see on the basis of cost which sentences are most cost effective, but also they can see on the basis of recidivism that for most offenses, with most offenders, incarceration is going to make recidivism worse, not better. Just my last comment is that what we really need to reduce mass incarceration is to have every state looking at every one of these pressure points where we need changes in laws and policies and practices. And just to throw out the best example of that, I think, is that our colleague Jim Austin says that if New York, in addition to what it's been doing to reduce mass incarceration, also adopted the back end and prosecutorial policies in New Jersey, New York's reduction would probably be in excess of 50% today. And if New Jersey, which relied mostly on back end and prosecutorial policies, adopted the kind of vigorous campaigns against racial disparity and stupid policies related to the drug war, and reliance on this city's network of ATI programs, New Jersey would probably be exceeding a 50% drop today. So if you put it together, if all these states were doing things that are smart at each point, we can do it.